Yo, what up? I assume if you're here, you either like Lies of P as a game, and YouTube has decided to recommend this video to you, or you've never heard of the game, and the algorithm has decided to show you my dumbass for some reason. Regardless, welcome. I'm very glad to have you here, and I'm going to make the case for why you should play Lies of P. First things first, for those who haven't played it, let's get this out of the way. Yes, this is a Souls-like. Wait. Don't leave. Hear me out. It's not just this endlessly. P is not like the other girls. First of all, there's a difficulty selection. The default is Legendary Stalker, the default difficulty that the game launched with. Then there's the easy difficulty, or Awakened Puppet, or the story difficulty, Butterfly's Guide. You can also summon a Spectre to help you at boss fights if you're having too tough a time. Now, if you're a Souls veteran, you're obviously going to pick the hardest difficulty. In fact, if you're a Souls veteran, the other difficulties don't exist. They're not for you. Go on. Get out of here. Okay, you can come back, but only because we're not talking about difficulty anymore. The thing that really sets Lies of P apart, at least in my mind, is the perfect guard mechanic. I've played this game for 500 hours, and that sound still gives me a dopamine hit every single time. So the way the perfect guard mechanic works in Lies of P is that you have your block button, which blocks attacks, obviously, but not completely. Simply blocking an attack will cause you to take reduced damage and give you what is known as guard regain. Guard regain is essentially recoverable HP that can be reclaimed by dealing damage with your weapon. In order to not take any damage from an attack, you'll have to execute a perfect guard, which is done by initiating a block just before being hit by an attack. So you might be thinking, okay, Lava, I hear what you're saying, but that sounds like a lot of work. Why wouldn't I just guard normally and get all the health back later? That's a great question, and I'll tell you why. You'll die. Guard regain is not infinite. If you keep taking attacks, once your guard regain is full, or empty, I guess, you'll take damage through the guard regain, and it can absolutely kill you. So you're going to have to learn to perfect guard. Well, not actually. Just because this game has more options for defense doesn't mean you can't roll around the entire game. So with those two things taken into consideration, if you're still with me, we'll talk about the other myriad of reasons you should absolutely play this game. Starting with the sound design of all things. My God, man, it hits every beat. The combat is so impactful and visceral. Hitting an enemy, perfect guarding, landing a fatal attack, all sounds so powerful and rewarding. On the other side of things, the sounds the enemies make, especially when they're out of sight or waiting to ambush you, is creepy and foreboding. It makes them feel even more dangerous than they already are, and it all sounds so damn good. The voice acting is really solid as well, providing even more depth and weight to each character's emotions. An aspect of the sound design you don't hear much about in a lot of these games is background music. And let me tell you, I've never appreciated ambiance in a soundtrack so much. There's actually very little background music in the game. So when it comes in, it hits really hard. Although the track in the last chapter does get old. In the absence of background music are the sounds of Krot, the occasional dog barking in the distance, the coughing of the few remaining deathly ill citizens, and the wind whistling through the abandoned streets. These sounds, on top of the deathly stillness and silence, does an excellent job of keeping the feeling of isolation and despair, while effectively building tension in the player. It also adds another layer on top of the fantastic world building. Lies of P takes place in the fictional city of Krot, some time after an event called the Puppet Frenzy. Krot is modeled after France in the late 1800s, with a bit of Italian influence thrown in, and you can see said influence in the best way. From the beautiful buildings to the cobblestone streets to the names and attitudes of the people you encounter. It's a beautiful, believable setting that helps further ground the world of Krot and helps the story feel that much more real. In keeping with the setting of said puppet frenzy, puppets are a relatively new invention, and they are essentially primitive robots built to perform menial tasks so that humans can focus on more esoteric pursuits. They were built to serve and protect until one day they all went berserk and slaughtered most of the humans in the city. There's much more to the story than that, and as you play, you'll find all manner of objects and scenes that tell a story of a proud people struggling to hold on in a dying city, whilst tragedy befalls them at every turn. From an unnamed man's farewell letter to his deceased wife and daughter, to the confessions of a snake oil salesman pretending to be a doctor, to a bloody journal of an unknown reporter who was close to cracking the mystery underpinning everything. Getting to see the struggle of the people of Krot not only gives us insight into the story, but also makes the world feel more alive than it has any right to on the surface. Early in the game, you'll also see things you can't explain. A blue-blooded corpse with its head smashed into a wall. A man claiming your father caused the puppet frenzy. And subtitles under certain enemies that imply they're trying to talk to you, tell you something. It all lends to the unraveling of a great mystery that keeps you guessing and wanting to know more. It complements the brutal, unforgiving gameplay well, providing an additional layer of motivation to push through the hurdles the game throws at you and uncover what's truly going on. Another thing that the setting of the game does is give a plausible explanation for the weird, janky movements of the enemies that Souls games tend to have. Especially in more recent titles, I've found, developers have gotten into the habit of giving their bosses and enemies very unnatural delays in their attacks in order to artificially increase the difficulty. It feels weird and immersion breaking. The reason I feel this works in Lies of P, though, is because the enemies are old, defunct puppets. Of course, their movements would be stilted and delayed. They haven't been maintained in years. They're leaking oil, their springs don't work, and the elements have taken a toll on them. And this doesn't overstay its welcome either. New enemies are introduced at various points in the game, and they behave very differently from the puppets. Faster, more aggressive, and with longer attack combos. It provides a very well implemented difficulty curve that also fits into the world and story of the game. Speaking of the game, we need to talk about the NPCs you encounter. Bro, they did not have to go this hard. Almost all of them are much more likable and deep than they have any reason to be. They all have tragic tales, they're good and virtuous people, and you can't bring yourself to dislike them. There are definitely some that aren't as strong, but even they have compelling stories that make you at least feel for their plight, if not outright adore them. I personally could genuinely gush about Antonia, Vanini, and Pulcinella for a lot longer, but I want to keep this as spoiler free as possible. It's a persuasive essay, not a story analysis. There are many good story analyses of this game out there, made by much smarter and more well spoken creators that are definitely worth a listen. One of the things that goes hand in hand with said NPCs and world building is P's humanity score. As you go through the game, you'll be put into various scenarios that give you an opportunity to prove your humanity. Whether it's helping an NPC with something troubling, lying to spare someone's feelings, or letting your rage get the better of you, things the game deems as human will give you a small amount of humanity, and a cryptic message will appear to clue you in on how much you have. The other way to get humanity is to listen to music. Throughout the game, certain NPCs will give you records for helping them. These records can be played on the record player in the main hub of the game, which also acts as a safe haven. The music on the records themselves is fantastic and fits beautifully in with the setting of the game. I don't know who they contracted to make these songs, but they did an absolutely fantastic job. I have definitely listened to a few of the songs on my own outside of gameplay. When it comes to measuring the amount of humanity you've accrued, there's no meter that's displayed, but the amount of humanity you have at the end of the game does determine what ending you get. So I'd recommend lying and helping people wherever you can. All right. It's probably about time for me to talk about the gameplay. As I mentioned before, there's the guard regain, and perfect guard mechanics, which provides plenty of complexity and room for skill expression all on its own. There's also a host of weapons to try out, all with unique movesets. Lies of P goes one step further, though. Most weapons you pick up, unless otherwise stated, can have their handle and blade split apart, and any combination of blade and handle can be crafted from the disassembled weapons. There are some crazy good combinations that don't feel like they should be nearly as good as they are, and then there are some absolute garbage combos that I would not even use if I was paid to. One of the neat things that Lies of P does is that many of the weapons the player can use are seen in the hands of enemies. It gives you a sneak peek at weapons you might not have found yet, or chose not to use. I think it's a very clever way to expose the player to more of what the game has to offer, while also encouraging exploration and experimentation. The only issue with this is that some enemies will have really cool weapons that you won't have access to, even though there is theoretically a moveset for them in the game. Looking at you, Veronique. Speaking of movesets, each weapon has a light, heavy, charge, and dash attack. Some weapons have attacks only usable out of a dodge, and most weapons have some sort of two-hit combo with their light, heavy, and charge attacks. In addition to dealing damage to enemies' health bar, attacks will also deal stagger damage. Every enemy has a stagger bar that is invisible until they are staggerable. Once the enemy is staggerable, their health bar will have a bright white outline for a short time. During this time, if you hit them with a charge attack or Fable Arts, you will stagger them and will have a limited time to perform a fatal attack. Fatal attacks are this game's version of the riposte from Dark Souls, and they're even more satisfying than the perfect guard. Each style of weapon has its own fatal attack, from a flurry of blows to a single powerful strike, each hit shaking the screen for maximum dopamine delivery. Now earlier, the perceptive among you heard me mention Fable Arts. Fable Arts are P's special moves. Like damage, moveset, and scaling, they're tied to specific blades and handles, and can be combined in some useful or not so useful ways. Each art will cost a set amount of Fable, varying by the art used, and the Fable can be gained in one of three ways: dealing weapon damage, performing a perfect guard, or executing a fatal attack. You can also give yourself a quick boost of Fable with a consumable item, but we'll talk about items more later. Like all other Souls games, Lies of P has a leveling system in which you can level up your character's attributes, and each weapon scales off one of three combat attributes to varying degrees. They have funny names, but they're your same basic Souls-like attributes, with Motivity being strength, Technique taking the place of Dexterity, and Advance replacing Magic. How a weapon scales with your attributes depends on its handle, and any upgrades to a weapon is given solely to the blade, allowing some combos that wouldn't make sense to actually work in your favor. There are also cranks, which can affect how a handle scales to help maximize damage, or make a weapon that would normally be useless actually be usable with your build. Last thing about weapons, and I know it's a lot, hang in there, we're almost done. There are three categories of damage in Lies of P: slash, strike, and pierce. Knowing which damage your weapons can deal is pretty self-explanatory. Swords slash, blunt weapons strike, and daggers pierce. You can, of course, check your weapon's stats at any time in your menu. Knowing what damage type your weapon deals is important, because each enemy has weaknesses and resistances for certain damage types. For example, puppets are weak to strike damage and resistant to pierce damage, the player included, and you can find upgrades for your defenses against each specific damage type throughout the game. While all weapons deal these types of damage, a select few weapons can also deal stat effect damage, so you can run around lighting things on fire with a tiny knife or electrocuting people to death with a giant circular saw. These status effects are also present in the environment and in certain enemy attacks, so keep an eye out for defensive parts to help mitigate them, as they can quickly make your life much harder. In addition to all these status effects, there are also special status effects that the player does not have access to, but will still definitely ruin your day. I won't tell you exactly what they do. I'm trying to entice you, not give you the answers, but they're called shock, break, and disruption. You'll find yet a third type of defensive part to mitigate the effects of these last three. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can kill you, and a lot of things you need to be prepared for. Lastly, and this one is only for the player, is the Legion Arm, an interchangeable left arm that can be modified to complement your playstyle and further upgraded to enhance your combat abilities. Admittedly, the system is a little shallow and doesn't provide too terribly much, with only like three that I find to be usable unless you're going through an advanced playthrough. Regardless, they're still fun to use. Use of this arm is tied to a resource also called Legion, which, depending on your build, can make it even less desirable to use, as you'll get surprisingly little mileage out of it before your Legion runs out. Complementing this expansive yet surprisingly tight weapon and damage system, Legion Arm notwithstanding, is a deep and customizable upgrade for the player. This upgrade system is known as the P organ, and can be only upgraded with quartz, a rare material hidden behind tough fights or dangerous exploration. Each quartz can be used to unlock a small passive buff corresponding with a specific active buff. As you go further down the upgrade tree, you'll need more passive buffs to activate the active buffs, and these buffs often have nothing to do with each other. For example, there is an active buff that allows you to change dodges together for increased mobility and safety. But the passive buffs can be anything from more stagger damage on charge attacks, to less guard regain damage, to recharging Legion on kill. There are a large number of nodes to upgrade, and the breadth of passive upgrades means you can tailor it to many different styles of play. Lastly, let's talk about items. Throwables, consumables, and the other useful tools. There's a good deal to be used when you're out and about in Krot. Throwables are great for dealing with a decent amount of range enemies you find, or just weakening an elite enemy before going in for the kill. They take the form of anything from little gears to thermite canisters to saw blades and broken pipes. Like your weapons, they will have their own scaling, and their base damage is surprisingly high in most cases, which is good because they are rather scarce. Consumables are your standard buffs and debuff cleansers. Need more Fable? Consumable. Need to run through fire? Consumable. Don't want to get one shot because some freaky opera spider lady's voice can randomly one shot you if you hear it too long? Seriously, what the fuck is disruption? Consumable. There is a consumable for almost every situation, and almost none of them feel superfluous, which is honestly impressive because it's so easy to have a bloated item system. Good job, NeoWiz. Nice work. And that's pretty much it. There's a couple of other resources you encounter, but they're directly tied to the plot, so I'm not going to talk about them here. In addition, they aren't super useful outside of one of them being able to reset your level. As we wrap up, I'm sure you could tell I really do love this game. It was my first foray into the genre of Souls-likes, and while it absolutely kicked my ass the first time through, I fell in love with overcoming the challenges it threw at me, the depth of the combat system with all its varying playstyles and skill expression, and the way it feels like you have just enough resources to make it through the challenge before you, but only if you lock the fuck in. I really can't say enough good things about this game, but for now I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to me yap. I'm currently doing 3 separate playthroughs of Lies of P, Deathless, one using each core build theme, Motivity, Technique, and Advance. If you want to come take a look at that, I post episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I really appreciate you being here. If you'd like to see me take on these challenges, go check out my channel. I really appreciate it. Take care.